You've heard of the Sacklers. You know the name. You've seen the documentaries. You've read the scathing articles. You understand that Oxycontin, their creation, tore a hole through the American heartland, destroying hundreds of thousands of lives while they amassed a fortune of over $20 billion before anyone even tried to stop them. You believe them to be the very definition of corporate evil, the apex predators of pharmaceutical greed. But what if I told you the Sacklers were just amateurs? What if I told you the playbook they used wasn't theirs? That it was written over a century ago by another family, a dynasty you've never heard of, a dynasty that didn't just profit from addiction. They industrialized it. They weaponized it. They turned an entire nation into their customer base on a scale 10 times larger. They addicted millions. They hollowed out generations. They fundamentally reshaped the entire economy of Asia. And when it was all over, when the bodies were counted and the catastrophic damage was done, they didn't go to prison. They received knighthoods. They had statues erected in their honor. Their names were carved into the stone facades of hospitals, universities, and libraries. Because that, you see, is how the playbook works. That is how true drug empires operate. Phase 1. You make your money by destroying human lives. Phase 2. You launder that blood money through philanthropy, purchasing respectability by the truckload. And by Phase 3, when anyone finally realizes what truly happened, you are too powerful, too legitimate, too respectable to be touched. This is the story of the Sassoon family. The opium cartel that financed modern India, bankrupted imperial China, and walked away as celebrated heroes. And if you think, for 1 second, that this is just ancient history, if you believe we learned our lesson, I invite you to look at your own medicine cabinet. Because the exact same playbook is running right now. The names have changed. The drug has changed. But the con is identical. And this time, it's happening on an even larger scale. Let's begin. The year is 1832. A prominent Jewish merchant family flees Baghdad. They are running from persecution, escaping a local governor who is squeezing them for money, threatening imprisonment, or perhaps something far worse. David Sassoon, the patriarch, takes his family first to Iran. Then, calculating his next move, he looks at the map, and he sees British India, specifically Bombay, a colonial port city absolutely exploding with trade, cotton pouring out, silver pouring in. And most importantly, the British East India Company, operating with zero oversight and a bottomless, infinite greed. Now, you must understand what David Sassoon was walking into. The British East India Company was not a company in any modern sense of the word. It was a corporate state. It possessed its own private army, larger than many nations. It had its own courts. It wrote its own laws. It controlled a territory larger than all of Europe. And it answered to absolutely no one, except its shareholders back in London. By the 1832, the company had colonized India, not through official government action, but through pure, unadulterated corporate conquest. They had fought wars, annexed kingdoms, and systematically turned an entire subcontinent into a profit generation center. And their single biggest product? The commodity that generated more revenue than anything else? Opium. David Sassoon arrives with almost nothing to his name, but he possesses 3 assets far more valuable than money. First, he has connections. A vast network of merchants stretching across the Middle East, built by his father, who had served as the chief treasurer in Baghdad. These were not casual business contacts. These were deep, intrinsic family and religious ties, bonds of trust that could not be bought. In a world where contracts were difficult to enforce, trust was the currency. Those networks were worth more than gold. Second, he has knowledge. He understands court politics, trade routes, and how to read the complex currents of power. His father's position in Baghdad taught him how governments really work, how officials think, and most importantly, how to position yourself as indispensable to the people in power. And third, he has timing. Because he arrives at the precise historical moment the British are solving their single greatest economic problem by turning India into a global drug factory. If you believe this history needs to be told, support the channel. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, and comment your thoughts below. But timing alone doesn't make you a billionaire. You have to understand what you're seeing. And David Sassoon understood immediately. He saw that the British had reverse-engineered the perfect criminal enterprise, one that operated with full legal protection. And he saw that there was a seat at the table for anyone willing to do the work they desperately needed done. Here is the context you are missing. This is the linchpin of the entire story. Britain is pathologically obsessed with Chinese goods. Tea, silk, porcelain. The British upper classes are, quite literally, addicted to tea. By the early 1800s, every single household in Britain drinks tea daily. It is no longer a luxury. It has become a cultural necessity. And all of it comes from one place, China. But China doesn't want anything Britain makes. The Chinese look at British wool, British manufactured goods, British anything, and they are completely uninterested. Why wouldn't they be? They have superior silk, they have superior porcelain, they have everything they need. So when British merchants arrive in Canton demanding to buy tea, the Chinese officials say, "Fine, pay us in silver." And that is exactly what happens. Every year, millions of pounds of solid silver flow out of British coffers and sail directly into Chinese hands. The trade deficit is staggering. By some estimates, Britain is losing £8 million in silver annually. That is hundreds of millions in today's money, vanishing into China every single year. This is not a simple economic problem. This is an existential crisis. The empire is bleeding wealth. If this continues, Britain's entire monetary system could collapse. The British try everything. They try aggressively marketing their manufactured goods, zero interest. They try negotiating better terms. China refuses. They try opening diplomatic channels. China isn't interested in an equal relationship with foreign barbarians. The Chinese emperor views Britain as a minor, insignificant tributary state, not a peer. So, the British are trapped. They need Chinese goods. China doesn't need theirs. And the silver keeps draining away. They come up with a solution. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most evil economic strategies in human history. Grow opium in India, massive, sprawling fields of poppies cultivated under British supervision. Then flood China with it, get millions of Chinese citizens hopelessly addicted. And suddenly, instead of Chinese merchants demanding silver for tea, Chinese addicts are paying silver for opium. The trade deficit doesn't just stop, it reverses. Britain profits, India becomes a continental narcotics plantation, and China drowns in addiction. Let's be absolutely clear about what this means. The British are deliberately manufacturing a drug epidemic. They are doing this with full, cold-blooded knowledge of what opium does. Opium was well known in Europe. It was understood to be destructive and highly addictive. British doctors used it medically, but only in tiny, controlled doses. They knew that large-scale consumption led to physical ruin, dependency, and death. They knew this, and they did it anyway, because the math worked. By 1830, British India is producing over 1,500 tons of opium annually, almost all of it destined for China. The East India Company controls the entire operation. They license the farmers to grow the poppies. They buy the raw opium. They process it in their own factories. They package it in standardized chests. And they auction it off to merchants who handle the last mile of shipping it into China. The company makes money at every single stage: licensing fees, processing fees, auction revenue, and taxes on the profits. By the 1,832nd, opium accounts for roughly 14% of British India's total revenue. 1 in every 7 rupees flowing into the colonial government comes from drugs. The entire financial structure of British India is built on narcotics. Roads, schools, military salaries, administrative costs, all of it is funded, in part, by opium. This is not some shadowy criminal enterprise. This is official, government, policy. And this is the system David Sassoon walks into. He sees it for exactly what it is, the opportunity of a lifetime. But here is what separates the Sassoons from everyone else. Most merchants just bought the opium at auction and shipped it. They were simple middlemen. David Sassoon understood a fundamental law of power. If you want to build an empire, you don't just participate in the system, you control it. Within a few short years, the Sassoons dominate the trade. Not through violence, not through intimidation. They do it through logistics, connections, and ruthless vertical integration. They don't just sell opium. They control the entire supply chain. They finance the cultivation in India, providing loans to farmers so they are forced to grow poppies instead of food. They own the massive warehouses where it's stored, strategically located near ports. They operate the fleet of opium clippers, fast ships that carry the cargo. They run the insurance that protects those ships, creating their own insurance company to internalize profits. They have agents in every single port, men who speak the local languages and can navigate both British and Chinese authorities. And most importantly, they have the British government's blessing, because the Sassoons aren't rebels, they are collaborators. They are the perfect partners for an empire that needs someone to do its dirty work while keeping its own hands officially clean. David Sassoon positions himself as loyal, reliable, and, above all, useful. When the British need capital for colonial projects, the Sassoons provide it. When they need someone to handle sensitive trade matters, the Sassoons step forward. This relationship is symbiotic. The British get a private merchant class to run their drug trade. The Sassoons get legal protection and exclusive access to the most profitable market on earth. It's the perfect partnership, and it makes both sides obscenely rich. By 1836, the Sassoon Company alone is shipping 30,000 chests of opium to China every single year. Each chest weighs over 120 pounds. Do the math. That is over 3.6 million pounds of refined, weaponized narcotics flooding into Chinese ports annually from just one family. And the scale keeps accelerating. By 1840, 40,000 chests. By 1850, 50,000 chests. By the late 1852, 59,000 chests. That's over 7 million pounds of opium every single year. All of it going to one destination, China. The impact is catastrophic. Entire coastal cities are collapsing into addiction. Society itself begins to disintegrate. You have fathers smoking themselves into oblivion while their children starve. You have workers so addicted they are physically incapable of functioning. Shops are closing because the owners are too high to work. Farms are failing because laborers are spending their meager wages on drugs instead of food. Productivity across the nation craters. The Chinese government is in a state of blind panic because they are watching their population and their economy disintegrate in real time. And the silver, the hard currency they had accumulated for centuries, is now hemorrhaging back out, straight into British and Sassoon hands. Every single ounce of silver that left Britain for tea is now coming back, and then some, through opium. The trade deficit has been reversed. Britain is winning, and millions of Chinese are paying the price with their lives. This is the first large-scale narco-state operation in modern history, and it is not run by back-alley criminals. It is run by respected businessmen, holding British titles, operating legally under the protection of colonial law. David Sassoon isn't hiding in the shadows. He is being celebrated in Bombay. He is a pillar of the community. He is funding synagogues. He is donating to charities. He is building schools. The local Indian population looks at him as a generous benefactor. The British look at him as a sterling success story, proof that their colonial system works, that anyone willing to work hard can prosper. But the Chinese see something different. They see their nation being systematically destroyed. They see their people enslaved to a foreign substance. They see their silver vanishing. And they finally, desperately, try to stop it. In 1839, a Chinese official named Lin Zexu is appointed by the emperor to end the opium trade. Lin is a rare figure in history. He is incorruptible, he is brilliant, and he is utterly determined. He arrives in Canton, the epicenter of the opium trade, and he moves with shocking speed. He surrounds the foreign merchant warehouses. He demands they surrender every last chest of opium in their possession. And when they resist, he doesn't negotiate. He doesn't back down. He confiscates over 1,400 tons of raw opium. He seizes it from British merchants, American merchants, and everyone else involved. Then he has it all destroyed, publicly. He mixes it with lime and salt and dumps it into the ocean. It is a powerful symbolic act. China is sending a message. No more. We will not allow foreign merchants to poison our people for profit. Lin Zexu then writes a letter to Queen Victoria. It is formal, it is respectful, but it is morally devastating. He asks how Britain can possibly justify selling a substance to China that is banned and controlled in Britain itself. He points out that British law recognizes opium as dangerous, that British doctors rarely prescribe it, that British society limits its use. So why, he asks, is Britain flooding China with it? Why is it acceptable to poison Chinese citizens but not British citizens? It is a perfectly reasonable, moral question. The British response is to declare war. Not because Lin Zexu broke any treaty, there was no treaty. China was fully within its sovereign rights to confiscate contraband. No, they declared war because destroying that opium meant destroying British property. And more importantly, it threatened the entire economic model. If China could successfully ban opium, the trade deficit would reverse again. The silver would stop flowing to Britain. The empire would go back to bleeding wealth. And that could not be allowed. So Britain sends the gunboats, the First Opium War, 16 state-of-the-art British warships against a Chinese military that hasn't fought a major naval war in decades. It is not a fair fight. It is a massacre. British ships have superior firepower, better tactics, and new steamship technology that allows them to move upriver regardless of wind. They obliterate Chinese coastal defenses. They blockade ports. They force China to the negotiating table. And the treaty that ends the war, the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, is one of the most brutally one-sided agreements in history. China is forced to pay Britain 21 million silver dollars to compensate them for the drugs they destroyed and for the cost of the war. China is forced to open 5 major ports to British trade, not just Canton. China is forced to cede the island of Hong Kong to Britain in perpetuity. And China has to give British citizens extraterritoriality, meaning they are not subject to Chinese law while on Chinese soil. Nowhere in the treaty does it explicitly say opium is legal. It doesn't have to. because by opening the ports and granting British merchants free access, the opium trade becomes impossible to stop. The floodgates are thrown open. And the Sassoons, who backed Britain throughout the war, providing ships, supplies, and financial support, they are rewarded. They get first access to the new ports. They expand their operations. And the opium trade explodes from 50,000 chests in the 1,840 seconds to over 70,000 inches, the 1,850 seconds, more than 8 million pounds of opium annually. China is being systematically, legally, and militarily drugged into submission, and the Sassoon family is at the absolute center of it all. But it gets worse, because China, broken and bleeding, does not simply accept this fate. They try again. In the 1,850 seconds, Chinese officials, in a desperate attempt to regain control, try to enforce their own anti-opium laws within the new treaty ports. They try to arrest dealers. They try to confiscate shipments. And Britain, now joined by France, sees this as a violation of their treaty rights. So they do it again. The Second Opium War from 1,856 to 1,860. This time, France joins the assault, eager for its own piece of the colonial pie. Together, British and French forces obliterate China's remaining defenses, march inland, and occupy the capital, Beijing. And in an act of profound cultural annihilation, they loot and burn the old summer palace, one of the most magnificent architectural achievements in human history. They destroy irreplaceable art, steal treasures, and burn the complex to the ground. It is a message. We control you. We can erase your history. When China surrenders this time, the Treaty of Tientsin explicitly legalizes the opium trade. For the first time, opium is officially, legally, and forcibly allowed into China. The Sassoons no longer have to hide, bribe, or smuggle. Their product is now as legitimate as cotton or tea, protected by British and French gunboats. The family's wealth doesn't just grow, it explodes. By the 1,850 seconds and 1,860 seconds, the Sassoons are operating the largest private merchant empire in Asia. But this is the crucial step in the playbook. They don't just ship opium, they begin laundering the money. They move into other commodities, cotton, tea, silk. They open their own banks, they buy massive amounts of real estate, they invest heavily in railroads and telegraph lines. Every single rupee earned from opium gets reinvested into something legitimate. This is the key to understanding how drug money becomes respectable money. You don't just hoard it in a vault, you invest it. You build the infrastructure of the very society you operate in. You fund industries. You employ thousands of people. You make yourself so indispensable to the legitimate economy that when someone finally asks where the money came from, you can simply point to the jobs you created, the buildings you funded, the services you provide, and suddenly, the drugs become a footnote, an uncomfortable detail that polite society agrees to ignore. Now, here's where the playbook gets truly dark. Because David Sassoon and his sons aren't just investing, they are building legitimacy. They are donating vast sums to charities. They fund schools and hospitals across Bombay. They build libraries and synagogues. David Sassoon becomes a household name, not for opium, but for philanthropy. In 1847, he funds the David Sassoon Library and Reading Room in Bombay, which still stands today. In 1861, he donates a colossal sum for the Sassoon Dock, which becomes one of Bombay's most important commercial ports. He funds schools for Jewish children. He funds hospitals for the general public. He funds orphanages. And the Indian population, seeing the Sassoon name on all these public institutions, thinks, what generous people, what pillars of the community. Nobody is asking where the money came from, or if they are not asking loudly. Because the British government is actively protecting the Sassoons. They are elevating them, giving them honors. In 1853, David Sassoon is appointed Sheriff of Bombay. It's a ceremonial position, but it carries immense status. He is now officially, publicly, part of the colonial establishment. In 1872, his son Abdullah, who anglicizes his name to Albert, is made a Knight Commander of the Order of the Star of India, a British title bestowed by the Crown upon a Jewish merchant whose entire fortune was derived from drugging China. In 1873, Albert becomes the first Jew ever to be granted the freedom of the City of London. Not even the Rothschilds, the wealthiest and most powerful Jewish family in Europe, had received this honor yet. The Sassoons were now, officially, more respectable than the Rothschilds. Think about that. That is how you launder a drug fortune. You don't hide it. You showcase it. You plaster your name on every building you can fund. You donate so conspicuously, so overwhelmingly, that questioning the source of the money becomes socially unacceptable. It becomes rude. and you align yourself so tightly with state power that attacking you means attacking the empire itself. The Sassoons understood this instinctively. Every school, every hospital, every library, every dock, it's not just charity. It is insurance. It is buying silence. It is a calculated investment in their own legacy, making absolutely sure that when the history books are written, they are remembered as benefactors, not drug lords. And it worked. To this day in Mumbai, the Sassoon buildings are celebrated landmarks. Tourists visit them, historians study their architecture, and almost nobody mentions the opium. In 1949, the Chinese Communist Party wins the Civil War and takes control of mainland China. One of their first acts is to nationalize all foreign assets. Every building Victor Sassoon owned, every business, every single investment gone, seized by the state, no compensation. He loses everything overnight. Over $1 billion in today's money, simply erased. Victor flees Shanghai with whatever liquid assets he can carry and relocates to the Bahamas. The Sassoon Empire in China, built over a brutal century, is finished, completely and totally finished. The irony is staggering. The family that made its fortune by addicting China is now expelled by a Chinese government that rose to power partly by promising to eliminate exactly that kind of foreign exploitation. The Communist Party weaponized the memory of the Opium Wars, the memory of merchants like the Sassoons destroying Chinese society as propaganda to justify their revolution. The Sassoons didn't just lose their assets. They became the symbol of the very evil China was rejecting. Meanwhile, back in England, the other half of the empire, David Sassoon & Co., is also collapsing. By 1939, the family's direct involvement ends. The company continues, but it's a hollow shell. The opium trade is long dead, the textile operations are declining, and by the 1982, the British government officially declares two former partners of the firm totally unfit to serve as company directors. The empire that once controlled 70% of the global opium trade ends not with a bang, but with quiet, bureaucratic humiliation. The buildings remain the libraries, the docks, the hospitals. But the family is gone. Scattered, forgotten. The name Sassoon means nothing to the average person today. And here is the lesson. Drug empires are always temporary. They make fortunes. They corrupt institutions. They destroy lives. But they do not last. They collapse because the market shifts, the government turns, or the family itself implodes. The Sacklers are following the exact same path. Purdue Pharma declared bankruptcy in 2019. The family has been socially exiled. Museums are stripping the Sackler name from their walls, the Louvre, the Tate, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They have been forced to pay out roughly $4.5 billion in settlements. But here is the critical detail, the modern update to the playbook. The $4.5 billion was paid out of an estimated $20 billion in total wealth. That means they kept over $15 billion. Most of the money is still there, shielded in offshore trusts, protected by complex legal structures, and distributed among family members who were never technically employed by Purdue Pharma. The Sassoons lost their empire because it was tied to physical assets in a country that finally rose up against them. The Sacklers learned the lesson. They extracted the cash. They've been held accountable just enough to make headlines, but not enough to actually lose their fortune. The next generation will simply re-emerge, somewhere else, under a different name, funding different operations. This isn't justice. It's a pivot. And look at the broader pharmaceutical industry. Johnson & Johnson, currently being sued for its role in the opioid crisis they made the raw materials. McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, the big three distributors, they shipped billions of opioid pills into small towns, far exceeding any legitimate medical need. They had the data. They saw the suspicious orders. They shipped anyway. All of these companies are still operating, they're still profitable, they've paid massive fines, billions in total, but they are all still in business. That's not accountability. That's just the cost of doing business. It is the exact same model as the Sassoons. Profit as much as possible. When the public pressure becomes too great, pay a fine, or, in their case, fund a hospital. Shift operations. And keep going. So what should you take from this? First, understand that our most respectable institutions are often built on blood money. When you see a family name on a university wing, ask where the money really came from. Charity is how you launder a fortune and buy immunity. Second, state-backed drug operations are legal right up until the moment they are not. The Sassoons operated within the law. Purdue Pharma operated within the law. Both were protected by the very systems meant to control them, right up until public outrage became too loud to ignore. The system doesn't stop drug empires. It profits from them. Third, this playbook runs over and over and over. Industrialize addiction. Maximize profit. Launder the money through institutions. Wait for the bodies to pile up. Declare bankruptcy, pay a fine, or retire. and let the next generation inherit the clean money. This is not ancient history. This is the present. Opioids in the 2000s. Benzodiazepines overprescribed today. ADHD medications creating lifelong dependency. Antidepressants with withdrawal symptoms as severe as the condition they treat. Every decade, there is a new drug, a new market, a new wave of addiction disguised as treatment. Modern medicine has shifted from curing disease to managing chronic conditions. And managing chronic conditions means creating permanent customers, customers who pay, monthly, for the rest of their lives. The Sassoons addicted China to opium. We call it treatment, but the economics are identical. Create dependency, ensure repeat customers, profit for decades. History shows us this pattern is cyclical. The only question is how much damage the empire does before it falls, and whether anyone will ever truly be held accountable. History says no. David Sassoon died one of the richest, most respected men in the world. His sons inherited titles. Their names are carved in stone, remembered for philanthropy, not opium. The Sacklers will not be held accountable either. They are still billionaires. And in 50 years, their grandchildren will be funding new museums, and people will have forgotten where the money came low. Because that is the playbook. That is how time works. It buries the bodies and polishes the legacy. The trick is always the same. Make your money from human suffering. Donate just enough to buy silence. And wait for time to turn your crimes into history.